Today, we're diving into a really tragic crime and a fascinating legal battle that forces us to ask a pretty fundamental question. Where exactly do we draw the line between mental illness and legal responsibility? So let's get into the court case of People versus Madarang, because it's a perfect example of how a medical diagnosis doesn't automatically get you a legal defense. You know, the court itself framed the entire case around this powerful idea. It all starts from the premise that the law is built for people who can reason. But what happens when that reason is just shattered by disease? That is the absolute core of this whole story. Okay, so before we can even begin to unpack the legal puzzle here, we have to face the human tragedy that started it all. What exactly happened in the Madarang home? The event itself was just brutal and direct. Fernando Madarang, a man who'd spent 16 years of his life as a seaman, killed his wife Lilia right there in their family home. And when you look at the details, it just gets even more harrowing. Lilia was pregnant with their 8th child. The whole thing started as an argument about jealousy, and their own children witnessed the attack. Afterwards, Madarang just walked out of the house holding the bolo, the weapon he used, terrifying his mother-in-law so badly that she literally ran for her life. Just a truly horrific scene. Now, this is where the case takes a really sharp turn. Because this isn't just about the crime anymore. It's about the state of mind of the man who committed it. So, at his arraignment, Madarang's behavior was so unusual. He refused to enter a plea, wouldn't answer any questions, that the judge ordered him to be sent to the National Center for Mental Health to figure out if he was even fit to stand trial. And after the evaluation, the diagnosis was clear: schizophrenia. The court records actually define it as a psychosis, a profound break with reality, involving poor judgment and a complete inability to tell what's real from what isn't. And this, right here, is the crux of the defense. A doctor from the mental health center testified that his illness likely started before the killing even happened. So on the surface, it seemed like a pretty straightforward path to an insanity defense. Which brings us to the central question, doesn't it? You have a man diagnosed with a severe mental illness who commits a crime he says he doesn't even remember. Surely that means he's not criminally responsible, right? Well, the law has a very specific and, frankly, pretty surprising answer to that. To really understand the verdict, we need to step back from this one case for a minute and look at how the legal system has been trying to define insanity for, well, almost 2 centuries now. Legal systems have wrestled with this forever. It goes all the way back to the famous Magnatin Rule of 1843, which basically just asks if the person knew right from wrong. Then you had tests about irresistible impulses or whether the crime was a product of a mental illness. Every single one of these tests is trying to pinpoint that exact spot where a medical illness erases legal blame. But the Madarang case took place in the Philippines, which happens to use one of the absolute strictest standards for insanity in the entire world. And this is the key. It's not enough to be mentally ill. The law there requires proof of a complete and total breakdown of reason, right at the very moment the crime was committed. The accused has to have acted without the least discernment. That is an incredibly high bar to clear. And this right here reveals a crucial distinction that the law makes, one that, let's be honest, we often confuse in everyday life. A medical diagnosis, like schizophrenia, it describes a person's long-term chronic condition. But the legal standard for insanity, it has nothing to do with the diagnosis itself. It is a laser-focused look into a person's mind only in those few seconds it took to commit the crime. So let's go back to Fernando Madarang. How in the world did the court apply this incredibly strict standard to his case? Well, his defense built what seemed like a pretty strong case. He claimed he had amnesia. His violent, unremorseful behavior, that seemed to fit the profile. The doctor said insanity was a high possibility, and they argued, who in their right mind would kill their pregnant wife over simple jealousy? But the court just systematically took that case apart. That claim of amnesia, the court saw it as self-serving and way too easy to fake. Lack of remorse? Sadly, that's common, even in criminals who are perfectly sane. And the doctor's high possibility? Well, the law demands proof, not just possibility. But the fatal blow was this. There was zero evidence that Madarang was acting bizarrely immediately before the attack. In fact, the doctor even admitted that schizophrenics can have lucid intervals, moments where they absolutely know right from wrong. And so, the verdict was guilty. The court ruled that, yeah, while Madarang was clearly mentally ill, his defense failed to provide that specific, convincing evidence they needed to prove he had a complete deprivation of intelligence at the exact moment he killed his wife. The presumption of sanity, which applies to every single one of us, was just not overcome. The Madarang case leaves us with this really profound and honestly unsettling question. The law demands a clear black and white line for who is responsible. But the human mind, especially one that's afflicted by illness, it's just a universe of gray. So where do you think that line should be drawn?